Welcome to the Higher Ed Podcast. I'm Andrea Backman, president of Strayer University. This podcast is about work, careers, and economic mobility. In each episode, I sit down with business leaders, employment experts, and HR professionals. These are highly successful people who want to share career advice with you and some tips and tricks for getting started, getting ahead, or changing your career path. In this episode, I talk with Byron Garrett, a true Renaissance man with deep roots in education, government, and business. Not only is he entertaining, he's got great insights on building careers. Join us as we explore how to network, pivot, and find the mentors that can help take your career to the next level. This is Higher Ed. So, Byron, I'm so excited to be in this room with you and to start a conversation with you today. And I would love to be able to very successfully and carefully get through all of your accomplishments and the different roles that you've had in different industries and some of your passion projects. But the list is that impressive that I'm going to pass it to you to tell us a little bit about those.
So my life is split in a couple different ways. I tell people I've spent my time in government, nonprofit, and corporate. I also dabble in the author and speaker space. Currently, I serve as president and CEO of the National Job Corps Association, which is a nonprofit, but also used to be CEO of the National PTA once upon a time, the Parent Teacher Association. On the corporate side, I've consulted with NBC and Viacom, but also led education strategy, leadership, and policy for Microsoft for a number of years. And in a former life, I used to be a Cade school principal. That's where I really got my career and my start and my orientation about life, which led me to be the education policy advisor to the governor of Arizona. And then to fuel my creative passion and interest, I serve as visionary and chief creative officer of the Valdisio collection. So this particular jacket that I'm wearing today. So it's been a really amazing journey and amazing career.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have gotten through all of that for sure. I would love to get us started just hearing a little bit about how you as a child even became interested in the notion of business.
So I'm the youngest of three. I always have to start there. So I'm the favorite child. Everyone should know that without question. My brothers would disagree, so I have two older brothers. But as a kid, my parents would always say, anything that you want, you need to save up for. So whether that was making an allowance, whether it was trying to find a part-time job, whatever that may have been. And so all the way back to elementary school, I've always been this serial entrepreneur. I had the lemonade stand on the corner that did a merger and acquisition with the lemonade stand across the street with Bethany and took over her lemonade stand, to having a jewelry business, to a candy business. So I was always fascinated with this idea of how do I generate revenue, but at the same time frame, how do I make people happy with whatever product that is? But at the end of the day, my sole goal was to make sure that I had enough money to cover my half or whatever portion I had to pay. So my first bike, I had to pay for half of it. And I'll never forget, I went home one day and 2 weeks in and said, hey, here's my money. I dropped it on the table. My dad was like, whoa, we did not expect it to happen that quick. And yes, where did you get this money?
That's interesting. And I will say that my two sons had a lemonade stand that made bank. I don't even know how much. How can you make that much money from a lemonade stand? It's just the generosity of people.
It's the goodwill.
Yes.
It's the person that gives you $20 for the $2 cup and says, keep the change.
Yes.
And you have that happen 5 or 6 times, and you're like, oh, customer service makes a big difference. I need to smile more and be really friendly. And you need to have good product, too. If it's bad, people will tell you that.
You talked a little bit about school.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know you're still involved very much in thinking about learning and youth.
Question.
Can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing there?
All of my work has been around how do you help young people formulate the mindset for how they can actually succeed in life and make sure they have the tools and strategies to do that. And education becomes number one.
When you think about individuals who might come back to college late in life or who worked for a long time before, had families, and are now saying, this is my time, but there's a lot of competing life priorities. What's your advice to someone embarking on that journey?
The first thing I would say is take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. And then the second thing I would say is you've got to do it. And so for anyone, whether you're in your late teens, 20s, 30s, and you're on the fence of making the decision, I guarantee you it is worth it to spend the time and make the investment. Because it not only personally are you going to feel better with the sense of accomplishment, but professionally it is going to unlock opportunities that you can't even see yet.
Yeah. So do you see education as a catalyst for economic mobility?
Oh, without question. It's the one thing I've always believed and been taught that is a passport to success. I didn't say a guaranteed passport to wealth, but it will transition you from one station in life to the next. It may not be for everyone right now, but at some point in time in your career and in your life, you need the knowledge and acumen in order to advance in whatever industry that may be. Even as we talk about apps that have been developed, there's a lot of conversation about
ChatGPT.
Of course, right? And so even with that, I need to be able to formulate the right question for it to give me the information I need. And then I need to be able to read and understand and assess what it actually gave me back in the 3 to 5 minute inquiry. And so I still need some level of intellect and knowledge even to make that work. Even in the automotive industry or manufacturing, I need to understand how the machinery works. I need to understand the systematic process and critical thinking. All of those are skills that you don't just learn through osmosis. You learn through an academic development, through coursework, and really working on project-based learning. And all those things really make you a well-rounded individual and contribute to your success long-term.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up the ChatGPT piece because I know there's a lot of controversy and there's still a lot of things that are unknown, if you will. But if you think about when calculators were first introduced and people just thought it was heresy because, you need to know how to do the long-form math. And all of the other innovations that have come through the educational system that have actually created far more progress than not. And I think ChatGPT is an area where we're going to see a lot of progress because you're right. You have to intelligently ask it a question to give you something back. So it's just it's the evolution of learning. And we'll be right back. Hey, higher ed listeners, be sure to check out my conversation with Emily Dickens, a human resource expert who shares some really important career advice. So, Byron, I often get asked from folks what it takes to get started. When you see into the future and you can see yourself maybe way down, but it's a journey to get there, what advice do you have for people to get started?
Well, a number of things, and I'll use this example. So in my professional career, I grew up in North Carolina and South Carolina. I packed up and moved to Arizona. I only knew the person that hired me at Junior Achievement when I moved to Arizona. So I went to every community event, every community function, every activity, because I knew I needed to build a network. And here I was in a huge marketplace where I didn't know anyone. And I think for folks, regardless of where you are in your career phase, continuing to build that network and making sure that you're in rooms that you need to be in and that people who are in rooms that you're not know who you are and they can speak good things about you even though you're not invited into that room, I think it makes a fundamental difference.
Sometimes there's privilege because people have access to bigger networks than other people do. I would say growing up, that would be my circumstance. There was no network that someone introduced me right away to be able to figure out how I'm going to progress in my professional career. And so what advice do you have for people who either don't have access or who are complete introverts and putting themselves out into a network is really hard?
I would tell you use whatever tools and resources you have available to you because oftentimes we're putting excuses before we even take the first step. You're already defeating yourself by saying, oh my God, I don't have the right network. I can't get to this meeting. I don't have money to go to that particular dinner. Well, figure out a way to do the things that you can do that are within your control. And other things in the universe, I have found over time, will literally meet you where you are. You're at the event, ready to go, and you realize, oh my God, it's $100. I thought it was $50. I don't know if I can swing that. And then I've met somebody who said, hey, I got an extra ticket. Anybody need a ticket? My spouse couldn't come or my business partner. I've literally had that happen on more times than I could actually count. But the key thing was I was willing to take the initiative. And so I try to encourage people, you have to be willing to take the initiative. I may not see the entire staircase, but I've got to be able to take the first step and then follow that with the second and the third and the fourth. And before you know it, you're definitely not where you started. You may not be where you want to be, but you're definitely not where you began.
Yeah.
Because success does not happen overnight. It happens over time.
So you had some phenomenal mentors in your career. Yes. I think a lot of people agree that success in life has a lot to do with the people you surround yourself with, but that mentorship and finding people who will help you think about progress for yourself is super important. So talk about if those were just, they happened to you or you made those mentorships happen, or what was that like?
It was a yes and. It wasn't an either or. It was really both. And what I mean by that is, so for example, Stedman Graham is a long-term mentor and now professional friend and colleague. I was involved in a youth program called Junior Achievement. He was on the national board. We were at the event. In the middle of his speech, he says, everybody should have mentees and people that they're supporting and giving back. So I walked up right afterwards and said, hi, Mr. Graham, I'm your new mentee, and introduced myself. And he's like, excuse me? I said, you just said everyone should have a mentor and they should have a mentee. And here I am. He was like, Byron, I live in Chicago. I said, I know, but your business partner is based in High Point, which is where I go to undergrad, and I know you fly there quite often. So anytime you make your way back to High Point or in that particular region, I will make my way to get to wherever it is that you are. I can't get a flight to Chicago as of yet, but if you're back in High Point doing something, and literally his office reached out about 6 months later and said, hey, he's going to be at this Crosby golf tournament in Winston-Salem. Would you like to connect with him? I said, yes, I want to buy him breakfast. And as we sit down, he says to me, he's like, why did you say breakfast? I said, because I knew that I probably could afford breakfast, and you may decide to order a very expensive steak or seafood, which I could not afford as a college student. He was like, but I'm your mentor, so I would be covering the expense. I said, my parents always told me you never make that assumption, and you always offer kindness before it's shown to you.
Wow, that's fantastic. Let's talk about the ability to pivot. I know this is the sense of agility, et cetera, employers are seeking. You've done a lot of that in your own career and personal life. Talk about why all the pivots and what you've learned from the pivoting.
In my case, I didn't just shift roles.
Right.
I actually shifted industries. The first thing I would say is I learned throughout that experience that leadership is universal, regardless of industry. Good. If you are a leader and you have the skill set and acumen, it does not really matter what industry it is. But I also learned from a personal perspective that I like the idea of doing things different. And so for me, being in education or being in government or being in nonprofit spaces or being in fashion, the totality of those experiences help keep me happy. Doesn't mean, but I'm also very clear that I can't be all of those things all the time and be highly successful at all of them, right? And so this notion of saying, what do I put on pause? What do I really focus on now? And so I think in this day and age for folks throughout their career, you should think about the opportunity to shift. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. Now, I'm not saying you go work somewhere 6 months and you start somewhere else 6 months later. I believe you do need to say, here are the goals that I wanted to accomplish, because you want to be able to talk about what did and did not work through those experiences. And you always want to have a track record of accomplishments to say, even though I may have only been there a year or I was there 3 years, this is what I was able to accomplish in that period of time. And we know that if I were there longer, that would probably be a multiplier in terms of what I delivered. One of my former bosses at U.S. Customs and Border Protection, I had worked in the federal government. I was at USDA, got asked, hey, we're creating this chief of staff slot at Customs and Border Protection, and your skill set and your ability is going to fit this particular role. Can you do it? And I was candid. I said, I'll come over and take the role. I'm excited about that. But more importantly, I just started an interview process to be CEO of the National PTA, the Parent Teacher Association. He said, okay. I said, their search is going to take 6 to 8 months. So I just want you to know that should I get that role, I'm going to leave the federal government. And I just want to be honest, because I'm a person of integrity. I don't want him to be surprised. Meanwhile, I'm taking my role as chief of staff, making significant changes, all the things that he set out and said he wanted to accomplish. Literally at the end of the 6 month, I get a call saying, guess what? You finished the interviews. You are the person. You're going to become the next CEO of the National Parent Teacher Association. I'm thrilled. I'm excited. And I'm also freaking out. How do I go tell him? But thankfully, I had the conversation early on. And his response to me has stuck with me to this day. He said, Byron, it was better to have had you for 6 or 7 months than not to have had your talent at all. And so don't excuse yourself from making the pivot because you think it's going to have a negative impact. That's when I say the universe oftentimes rises up to meet you, but you've got to take that first step knowing that it's possible.
To be proactively candid in a situation like that, you didn't need to do that. And that ability to be candid in the right way makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
So some of the things that I've heard you say is to be courageous. So put yourself out there, even if it's to be able to network, right? You have to be able to take a step. To surround yourself with people who will be mentors to you. What else would you add to the list?
Give yourself grace. That is probably the biggest thing I've learned over the last few years, especially through COVID, that it is okay to acknowledge that everything did not work out the way that you set out your plan and your goals. that you need to give yourself grace and understand that, okay, it did not happen last week or last year or in the last 6 weeks, but I can still commit to seeing a fundamental change at a different time and way. And I fundamentally believe that whatever is for you will meet you when it's supposed to meet you. That is hard for us to accept, but that is a reality.
Well, thank you for coming, and I'm really glad to have this conversation with you today. And I feel like there's a lot more coming. So next time I interview, this list will be, there'll probably be another chapter that is even more interesting. So thank you for sharing.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Podcast, hosted by me, Andrea Backman. Today's episode was produced by Lloyd Fales for Strayer Studios. To hear more career insights, check out my conversations with other fascinating guests on higher ed. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.